October 29th, 1929. Also known in history as Black Monday. Wall Street crumbled within a night, and within 2 short weeks, hundreds of billions of dollars went down the drain. Many people lost their jobs. Many more lined up for charity food assistance. The U.S. and the rest of the world began to enter a 10-year economic recession. Banks closed. Factories were shut down. Stores were empty. Almost 1/4 of the population was out of work. From the heat of the gold rush, San Francisco plunged deep into a dark abyss. Afraid that immigrants might compete with the white people for jobs, the American government established very strict immigration policies. It assigned Asians into restricted zones and forbid all immigration to the U.S. The citizens of San Francisco were segregated. Chinese were prohibited from white communities. No matter if it was a school or at the workplace, all Chinese were restricted to stay only in Chinatown. During the middle of the 19th century, the Chinese immigrated from China, especially from around the Canton region. They came to chase after the wave for gold. They called this place Golden Mountain. Under a backdrop of this period, a curiosity for Chinatown began to develop, and today, San Francisco Chinatown is a world-renowned sightseeing location. San Francisco is also known as the Old Gold Mountains. During the middle of the 19th century, the Chinese immigrated from China, especially from around the Canton region. They came to the west coast of America to chase after the wave for gold. They called this place the Golden Mountain, meaning you could strike gold anywhere. The work was harsh. Through blood and sweat, they built the railroads. The Golden Mountain was a dream that, in the end, held countless Chinese immigration stories of strife and pain. I'm Yalek Wong, KTSF news anchor and reporter. In the next half hour, we'll take a look at how the Tung Hospital developed from 1920 through 1980, how it came to thrive by overcoming many difficulties, just to serve the San Francisco Bay Area Chinese community's medical needs. The following program is a co-production between KTSF and Chinese Hospital. Originally named Tunghua Dispensary, Tunghua Hospital was set up with both Eastern and Western departments and doctors. Its goal was simple: to give medical services to the Chinese immigrants of the city. After the dispensary burned down in the 1906 earthquake, the board of the Tunghua Dispensary decided they needed a new hospital. With $10,500, they purchased the property at 835 Jackson Street. With community help and support, Tunghua Hospital opened on April 18, 1925. Tunghua Hospital was in the process of becoming a modern medical facility, but during the transition period, the hospital faced a decade-long recession. Oh, what joy, now that the hospital is open. But the real problem came after the hospital opened. In 1925, we never thought so much would happen. The 1930s, the Great Recession. Almost all American major cities were dying. There was the great drought in China. We didn't know where we would find the money to run the hospital. In the end, we had to rely only on ourselves. The economy of America was suffering. Unemployment was high. If white people couldn't find work, immigrants had it even harder. Of course, we didn't have any jobs either. If you were an immigrant, it was even harder to find work, and the expense of running the hospital was simply overwhelming. At this time in China, the 9/18 incident occurred. Faced with both internal and external fears, immigrants couldn't muster enough will and the means for charity purposes. Then, on top of everything, the war against Japan began. All the immigrants who were patriotic donated what they had to the cost of the war. Everything disrupted the donations that Tunghua Hospital needed, and the hospital was faced with a financial crisis like never seen before. When Pearl Harbor occurred, the U.S. finally decided to join the war completely, and it needed a larger labor force. Work opportunities for immigrants finally returned. This has always happened. People like coming to the Tunghua Hospital to give birth. One year, we had about 400 babies born here. That's right, 400. Bruce Lee was born here. On November 27, 1940, world-renowned action star Bruce Lee was born in Tunghua Hospital.
But Bruce Lee was born there. And pretty much back then, if you were Chinese in San Francisco, you were probably born at a Chinese hospital. So that continued to serve the community for a long time. That's where I was born. I was born at the old 1925 building.
Most of the people who work in Tunghua Hospital, the doctors, the administrators or staff, were also born in Tunghua Hospital. Larry Liu is one of them. He can remember back to the 1960s, when both his parents immigrated to the U.S. They didn't have medical insurance, they were not used to speaking English. Tunghua Hospital was their only choice.
But when we got here, there was, my parents didn't have any insurance. I don't think my dad had a job by then. Maybe he was a busboy in a restaurant, it's not clear. But he didn't have insurance. Back then, a lot of people didn't have insurance. You just went to the hospital and got services taken care of. So the hospital took care of my family.
Tunghua Hospital has a very important place in American history. The entire United States had only one Chinese Tunghua Hospital. People even came from as far away as New York, Boston, and Chicago for treatment because their English wasn't good, or they couldn't stomach Western meals. Being able to eat food catered to Chinese was very important to them. Back then, we had doctors talking to you by your bedside. Therefore, adding everything up, this organization is very important in the history of Chinese Americans. But to run this hospital, well, that was not very easy. Operating Tunghua Hospital was definitely not easy. At the time, Tunghua Hospital's equipment compared with equipment of first-rate hospitals was still very far off. The board knew that if they didn't adapt, the hospital would become obsolete. So they decided it was time to rebuild Tunghua Hospital into a proper, standard new hospital. But as always, good things come with great struggles.
So the codes for hospital care changed enough in the 70s that the old hospital building was no longer relevant as a hospital, and we needed to build a new one. And so that's how the new 1979 building was built and created right next to the old hospital as the hospital building.
When the 1979 building was built, it wasn't built to be a hospital initially. It was built to be a medical center, office medical center. Because until the 1929, when the fire department were going to shut us down, and then we had to continue, we had to basically redesign within the box of the medical office building and create a hospital.
The original expansion plan of the board needed the government's permission to build a new hospital with a capacity of 150 beds. But the government said that there were too many available beds elsewhere in the Bay Area, so they only allowed for an expansion for an outpatient clinic. The board accelerated the finishing time, but just as the new clinic was finished, the old hospital was inspected by the government and deemed as unsafe against possible earthquakes. If the conditions were not improved, the hospital would have to be shut down. The board suggested move the entire hospital into the newly built outpatient clinic, but this too received resistance from the government. Ultimately, the board overcame many difficulties and amassed enough funds. The new hospital officially opened in 1979. This new hospital, with a capacity for 59 beds, cost about $5.5 million, drawn from federal government loans and a subsidy of $870,000. It was about 39,000 square feet, and at the time, it was a fairly modern medical facility. But in 1979, the old hospital was pretty old. As early as 1955, people were saying they needed a new hospital. So, the problem resurfaced again in 1979. If you don't improve the old building, you can't be a real hospital. It certainly seems that all good things require great struggle just to build one hospital. So again, the community joined together and received generous contributions from Tung doctors. For that reason, the board added one new member, a representative from the coalition of doctors. Tung Hospital got through the 1906 earthquake, it got through the health code fiasco and the Depression, and they always managed to scrape by. Earlier we mentioned the birth rate at Tung Hospital was very high. So, which famous martial arts superstar was born here? And what was the year? Of course it was Bruce Lee. He was born here in 1940. In 1979, the U.S. announced that it would terminate its foreign relations with Taiwan, a relationship of 66 years. Instead, the U.S. developed a relationship with the People's Republic of China. In the same year, there was a great influx of Vietnamese and other Southeastern Asian refugees coming into the U.S. International policies became unpredictable. Through all of this, Tung Hospital never changed its mission in serving the Chinese community.
I was the first trained cardiologist to come in, but now we've got probably 10 that are actively practicing at the hospital. And with these new generations of training that came in, they wanted more and more equipment, and everything is state of the art.
The field that I went into was relatively new back in 1976, and so I actually became their first respiratory therapist. And I did not know that at the time that I was hired, and so as time went on, I started out as a one-person department, and it developed into, I think I have, 12 employees now?
In 1900, Tung Hospital consisted of 10 Eastern and Western doctors. Today it has developed into a hospital with 150 staff members. Colin Kwok and Elena Wong are both seasoned medical professionals of Tung Hospital. Retired cardiologist Colin Kwok was born in the hospital. He worked in many mainstream hospitals, but he ultimately returned to Tung Hospital.
Well, I always thought all along that I would come back to my own community. I had some temptations to go elsewhere, but always my heart was here. And I felt growing up that I probably would be coming back. My friends are here, my family is here, and it just seemed very, very natural to come back to my own community.
To be honest, Chinatown was probably the last thing from my mind that I thought I would have worked in. And typically, being raised within the Chinese community in Chinatown, being American born and first generation, your first thought is, get away from Chinatown. And so it was quite interesting how things evolved, and you get back to within that community. So it's the last place that I thought I would have worked.
Tunghua Hospital is now fully equipped and up to the same standards of any comprehensive mainstream hospital. It has modern operating rooms, X-ray, radiology, nuclear medical departments, laboratories, heart and lung, respiratory departments. There are also other supplementary medical services too. For Colin Kwok, who was tasked with archiving employee profiles, the evolutionary history of Tunghua Hospital is part of the history of American medical advancement.
Well, Chinese hospital actually evolved as medicine evolved, and the discovery of penicillin had a great deal to do with suddenly the implosion of knowledge that we had in medicine, and all these different trends started. With that came other antibiotics, control of public health measures, streptococcal infections came under control, rheumatic fever came under control. With that, heart disease came under control, and at least to the extent that we have it now. And the hospital reflected all this.
But other hospitals do not always provide Chinese and English bilingual and other multilingual services.
Because having an interpreter isn't the same as having a Chinese provider. And I'm speaking of the person that registers you at the hospital front desk. I'm speaking of the person that draws the blood, the person that tells them how to stand and breathe when they take their x-rays. I'm speaking of the nurses, the pharmacists, the doctors. I'm speaking about the food and the wonderful staff we have in the kitchen. It's a lot better than just having an interpreter. This is a Chinese environment that we have.
You know, on my days off, my weekends off, I would work and go to other hospitals just to make sure what we provided was good care. And so I got to get a good picture of what happens in other hospitals. And I saw a lot about our community, the elderly, the non-speaking English patients, and what they had to go through. And I even experienced that myself when I had to be in a different hospital for some minor surgery. So the reason why I'm here and the reason why I say is that I really think that what we provide for our community and for our elderly and our monolingual patients is nothing else that anybody else can do.
The thing about Chinese hospital is we cater to our culture. We understand our culture. We understand our beliefs. We understand what foods are important. You know, I think I've learned most of my Chinese is working at Chinese hospital, you know, and working at the bedside.
In San Francisco, Tunghua Hospital is the only independent hospital that was built by its community. And in the U.S., it is also the only one operated solely by Chinese.
There was a healthcare futurist who said that Chinese hospital would be the first to go because we were so small. And today, we're the last to stand. Because all the other hospitals have been bought over by another organization, we still continue to care for the community under the Chinese Hospital Association. French hospital, German hospital, I don't even know because I wasn't really in healthcare at that time, but I was amazed too how many hospitals have disappeared and now how many of the bigger hospital has joined other hospitals. But again, Chinese hospital continues and is still here and is still independent.
Starting back in 1979, Tunghua Hospital operated marvelously. But a little more than a decade ago emerged yet another plan for a third reconstruction of Tunghua Hospital, and the new hospital opened in April 2016. Before the break, we mentioned that the brand new hospital facility opened on what day in 2016? The brand new hospital opened on April 18th, 2016.
I know that the 1979 building, is fully functioning today. It's run very well, but it's not, it's a 1979 building, and today's day and age of hospital technology and expectations of patients and standards, there's a new requirement to, like I said, to upgrade everything. So it's a great opportunity for the delivery system to upgrade the hospital.
The third reconstruction of Tung Hospital has complied with new seismic requirements to allow this area, with a population denser than Manhattan, New York, to be able to provide safe medical services. But in Chinatown, where real estate is gold, where can one find a place to build a new hospital? So the board decided to demolish the original 1925 red brick structure on Sacramento Street to make room for the brand new facility.
When I first got there, they were just building the foundation of the current hospital building. But originally, I think it was meant to be a clinic or doctor offices. And that's when the hospital was notified that it was no longer considered earthquake code. So they converted that current building into a hospital and remodeled that. So we moved in 1979, and that's where we are now.
Elena Wong, who worked at Tung Hospital for 30 years, reminisces how she started her first shift back in 1976 in the original building. After a year, she moved over to the medical center next door and worked there for 30 years. She never thought that one day she'd return to the old address again for work, let alone in a brand new modern medical building.
And we've talked about, I would say probably the last 15 years, we've talked about building a new hospital. It's, yeah, okay, we'll believe it when we see it. So now it's like, oh wow, this is really neat. I didn't really think that I would get to see this in my lifetime.
Why?
Because we always talked about it. For 15 years or so, we're going to build a new hospital. We're not going to build a new hospital. We're going to build a new hospital. We're going to delay it. So it was kind of the running commentary at work with a lot of the older employees. Oh yeah, we'll not live to see this new building.
Tung Hospital started with $3,000. A century later, the new Tung Hospital would cost $160 million.
So the challenge of raising money for a new hospital is that now historically, we talked about the different generations of Chinese hospital, every stage of the way, the community entirely raised all the money for those hospitals, except for the current one. So this is the first time that the community had to go outside its own sort of area to get additional dollars to raise money for the hospital. Now, $160 million, actually, when you look at all the other hospital projects in California, it's actually not that much.
That's a difficult one because our board members have to fight very hard to get those to donate money. It's easier to give money to see, for babies who are sick because you see it and you know they will get better. But for seniors or for elderly, it's a little bit difficult. I mean, it's not easy, and it's always difficult to ask people for money, so difficult. But I think once the story was told, and we said that, we were denied health care, the reason why we're here today, and the reasons why we want to be here for another, several hundred years, people would give.
Looking back over a century ago, our ancestors overcame tremendous difficulties with the barest of resources. For the sake of other Chinese Americans who were also discriminated against, they worked together and built a medical organization to help all of those in need.
There's a countdown, and the staff are counting down, to when the doors will be open. A few of the nurses have been through each of the hospital, and they're still here. So this is going to be the third hospital that they're at. So they will know and feel what it's going to be like before they retire. And that's the exciting part too, when they could say, oh yeah, I was at the 1929 building. Oh yeah, I was at the 1979 building or something. Now they're going to be able to say, yeah, I was here when the building was open in 2016.